Appreciate it. Well, welcome, folks, to this session. It's going to be about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll leave a little time at the end for questions. This is all about a function in Juris called emailing and exporting bills, which some of you may have seen, some of you may use. And this session is all about explaining the details of it and how it can potentially help your firm save time and effort because it is designed to be a time saver and to improve processes. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about it in general. So first of all, you find it under the Juris core screen for billing. You'll see it has the little icon as you see here, export and email bills. And you can't obviously get to it from Juris Suite, it's just in Juris core. But when you bring it up, it's going to potentially bring up a couple key things. That is, it's going to help you create electronic copies of your final bills, which you can then export to a folder of your choice. That's our first bullet. Or you can automatically have Juris attach the bill or bills to an email and then automatically send that email to your clients. So those two components are the keys here. It can be a time saver if you want to export a huge amount of PDFs, for example, of client bills out to share folders for excuse me, different assistants or attorneys to get to, or you may have a whole lot of bills that you want to send out, and the process of creating an email each time for each bill, for each client, each matter is taking a large amount of time from one or more of your personnel. So those two can be real time savers. Now, it's not exactly the perfect fit that all firms use both those features. Some firms will use just the email. Some will really enjoy the fact that it creates automatic PDFs for you without having to do that manually. Now, when you utilize either one of these functions, you're going to have some available formats that Juris will allow you to export the bill into. And those are listed here: the Excel format, PDF, HTML, RTF, TIFF, which is an image file, a leads file, or just a straight text file. And I'll talk about a few of the differences of using some of these formats versus other ones if you want to take this a little further, specifically the RTF I'll talk about in a moment. Just a note that if you are going to use the email portion of this feature, which I'll talk about and we'll actually walk through it, you do need a MAPI compliant email package such as Outlook to be installed on the machine that's performing the task, because it literally will go look for the email program, fire it up, and send out those emails, dozens or hundreds at a time. So that's kind of an overview of it. It can be a terrific time saver depending on your needs, but I find that these sessions are much more helpful to actually go in and look at Juris and look at the actual screens than to look at slide after slide of my PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do, guys, is actually come out and come into what's called a virtual machine, which has Juris installed on it. So hopefully you guys will just actually see your screen flash for a moment, and then what I have is Juris installed on this interface. So what I'm going to do is open up Juris and log in. In this case, I'm going to log in with the SMGR login, which is, as some of you are probably aware, kind of like an admin login. It has full capabilities. You can do just about anything with this login. Okay, but before I get into the usefulness of these two features, they actually connect to two elements of your client record. So when people start to use this feature, if they're not aware that there's two components of client records which have a direct correlation to whether it works or not, then they can find that it's just not working. They're not bringing up any files, as we'll see. So I want to talk about the two things that these two features connect to in client records for them to actually work correctly. So I'm going to go into the tables section under Juris and go under the client section. And what I'm going to do is just open up, for example, the JonesNet client, which is just one of these fictitious clients we have. And you'll notice this is a very common screen you guys have probably seen. You'll have the folders down below for billing address, consolidations, and matters. Well, one of the key components of the automated email function that we're going to talk about is the fact that in your addresses for each client, you need to have, and I'll open up just say one of these addresses for this client, the accountant address. the system must have an email address in this email address field at the bottom. And if you don't happen to have an email address and it's not a required field, then as we'll see, if you run the program, it just will not include this client in the actual export of these files. So it won't say, hey, there's no email address. It just won't select that file or that client when you run the process. So important to note, you have to have an email address in this for the system to actually run the email portion. And the other piece is the fact that you have to have the matters themselves have to indicate what format the exported file will get to be. So for example, if you're sending emails and you want every single client to get a PDF of their bill, then you need to tell Juris that you want all those attachments to be PDF. If you want to export all of your bills to a share drive, and you want all those files to be, say, HTML files, then you need, again, tell the system what those file designations are. And where you get that is under the matters for each client. And in this case, we have two for this fictitious client. I'm going to open up one of them. And the key is under the address tab. So this is a matter screen, and I'm under the address tab. And you'll see, and people are probably aware of this if they've done printing, for example, of bills, that you obviously want to make sure you have your check mark here for different addresses that you want to be able to print bills for. But what I want to bring up to your attention is these two columns right here, email and export. Right now, for a typical new client, they're going to say none here. And what you want to do is, for each client that you want to either email or export, you select the corresponding file type that you want the system to export. So in our case, you will see that same list that I outlined earlier in the presentation. A fairly common one might be that I've just from talking to a number of clients and students in my classes that PDF is a common format that firms will use because it retains a good look to the bills. The next one is export, and the same thing here, same choices of file types, but just a separate function. So you need to select the correct file that you want to export. So in our case, let's say we were exporting, say, RTF files if we were doing exporting of these bills. So just to note that those are components you must set, both the email address, which again you can get right from here as well. You have to have an email address for the client, and you have to have these two settings indicating what file type you need. Once you have those in place, you are good to go. Now granted, that may take time because you may have dozens or hundreds of clients that you may want to use this feature under, and so this may take a little bit of effort to set all these up. But once they're set, then those clients are ready to roll. Okay, so enough of the groundwork of actually setting up the file components. Let's actually look at the process of doing these export email bills functions. So I'm going to go back under billing, and you'll see the icon has got a little green arrow. Double click on it. So let's just take a moment to kind of take in this screen because it's got a fair amount of stuff going on in the screen. And it's just going to go from top to bottom, and I'll explain it. And we'll actually run it and see what it brings back. So this screen does two things for you. You can choose, like I said, to do one or both. You can see that at the bottom of the screen, the two components are actually these little tabs at the bottom. And I'll talk about these sections at the top, but I just want to note that the export and email are different tabs at the bottom of the screen. Now, as we fill in information, the first thing Juris wants to know is, okay, what date are you going to put onto these bills? And the first choice is you can enter a manual date. I mean, if you're not keying off another type of date earlier in your pre-billing process, for example, you just enter a date that you want to set. So, say you want to have all your bills dated yesterday, you can just enter them, and then all of them will come out attached with that date. You can also use the date assigned in the edit pre-bill stage. So when you do edit pre-billing, you're going to have a choice when you select those pre-bills as a date assigned at that stage. You can pull that date if that date is acceptable. And then lastly, again, earlier in the process of editing pre-bills, when you select pre-bills, you'll actually have a bill-through date, which is another field that you'll see when you select your pre-bills. You guys are probably familiar with that, and you can key off that date as well. I found a lot of people just like the fact that they can manually enter a date and then just lock that into all the exported or emailed bills. Now, below that, the date is actually you're telling Juris, okay, which pre-bills do you want to select? Which ones do you want to include? Now, in my case, I have selected a certain amount of pre-bills in my edit select or my edit pre-bill screen. I've actually pulled in about 4 or 5. But what this is doing here is keying off the status of those pre-bills. For example, if you have your status in your edit pre-bill screens, your individual edits are ready to print bill. For example, as soon as you edit a pre-bill, for example, and then save it, then you will see that the status will automatically change to ready to print bill. That's Juris's way of setting a flag that it thinks the next thing you want to do after you edit a pre-bill is probably print it. So you can key off of that. You can also key off all pre-bills marked ready to post. That's just another flag that you can set in the edit pre-bill screen. And actually, let me go ahead and show that real quick because people may not be familiar with what that looks like. So I'm going to open up the edit pre-bills, and this screen, granted you guys would probably have this screen filled with dozens or hundreds of pre-bills. I only have a sampling here. But the flag I'm referring to is this ready to flag right here for individual pre-bills. You can change it based on your needs. For example, if this had not been edited yet, it would say ready to edit. If I had edited it, it would say ready to print. But I set all these as ready to post so that I could pull off of that flag. So just a kind of reminder about that process. All of these things connect. But, and I know it, some of you are probably thinking, okay, so if I have dozens of these pre-bills listed and not all of them are the exact same flag, then does that mean I have to go into the ones that are not set to that flag and set them? And the answer is yes. I wish there was a button that would automatically set them all to a flag, but that's not built into the software. But I know a few people who have asked if that could be added, so that actually may be on the list of a future feature. Now, once you've selected, and I'm going to select the one all pre-bills marked ready to post, you can also narrow it down if you want to select all pre-bills marked ready to print bill by a certain individual. For example, if you wanted to just send the pre-bills out for to an individual timekeeper, for example, and just his pre-bills are going out today, I could narrow it down. That way I won't have a lot of extraneous files and worried whose attorneys' clients are these. So you can narrow it down. Once you've done that, selected any of these 3 up top, it will allow you to narrow down even further if you want to how many clients are included. By default, it'll select all clients and all matters, but you can actually narrow down a selected range of clients and matters if you need to get that level of detail. In our case, I'm just have a short list, but even if I was in a real firm with maybe 60 or 70 and I was going to export these to PDFs, I might just keep these exact settings here. I might use the data signed in the pre-bill, for example, all pre-bills marked ready to post, and here's the kicker. To actually tell the system to go get the pre-bills that fit this criteria, you click this button right here called Get Pre-bills. You don't click this export email. We will in a moment. That's the last step in this process. So as soon as I click that, notice things start to populate below. I'm in the Export tab here, and 3 clients and matters have dropped right in here. What it's doing, and if I go to the Email tab, you'll see the same thing. 3 additional clients have been pulled into this list. What is happening here, and this is a concern for some clients when they use this, is they don't see anything come back. And this relates to, gee, I may not have had an email address in that client's email file, their address file, or I forgot to add PDF as a file format for the exported file. This is where you just will not see the client show up, even though you may think that the record is complete. And if you don't see a client in this list or clients, just go back to those clients and double check those 2 components, the email address and the file type for the email and export. But once you have, your set list of emailed and export files in this list, then you need to actually configure some components. So let's start with the email address. Right now, this system needs some important information before it can send out this automated email. And if you think about it, it's going to do something fairly drastic, right? It's actually going to open up an email and start firing off emails. This better be correct, or else you're going to have a lot of angry clients calling up saying, what's with that email you sent me? I don't understand. That would be a horrible thing to occur. So the way you configure the email is this button called Options. And what this is, when I click on it, it's going to be another kind of a little bit unusual looking screen. This export file path is grayed out at the top, and that's because what we're doing in this screen is actually configuring the name of the attached file. So let me say that again. You're actually configuring the name, the file name of the attached file or bill that will go on the email. And that's what you do in these fields down below called file name format. When I first learned Juris, this was a little bit hard to get my head under as to exactly what I'm building here. But let me give you an example. Say, for example, we are sending out our bills as emails, and I want those attachments to list the bill number. So I'm going to select bill number from the left box, move it to the right box. I also want the name of the client to show up. So I'm going to put the client's nickname. And these are all fields that are, connected to the clients. I want that to be part of the file name. And then I also want the name of the matter. So I'm going to say matter nickname. I want the name of the case to be included in the file as well. And then lastly, I want the user-defined text. And this is the kind of unusual one. I'm going to include something called user-defined text. And what that is just this box right here, where you could indicate a note like your most recent bill or the name of your law firm. So my last name is Kaufman, so maybe my law firm is Kaufman Law Firm, and I want to include the name of my firm inside the email, the attachment to the email. So if you'll look down below, and again, it's a little bit hard to kind of understand what I'm building here, but right here, they give you a sample file name. And this is literally, if I opened up this email, if I was a client of yours, and I opened up this bill in an email, and the file name for this PDF would say bill number 53, Acme Consulting, the bankruptcy case, Kaufman Law Firm, so a .pdf. So I basically, if you think about it, Juris has to put a lot of information into the attachment itself so that people can understand what it is that this attachment is, contains. Once you click OK, you've essentially created the email attachment name right here, and you'll see it'll populate here. Now, this is a good point to stop and mention something that's a major component of the email function of this dual feature right here, this email export that we're talking about. And that is when you send emails using this automated function, you're probably thinking right now, if it's going to send out, say, 112 emails, how does it know how to sculpt the individual emails themselves? Not the attachment, but what the subject line and what the actual body of the email says. And that's where there is no real customization of those emails. You only indicate the detail of the bill in the email attachment. So the actual emails are fairly sparse looking. And for that reason, this may not be the perfect example of a solution for all of you because you can't control, or customize that email to a great extent. You're basically putting the key information in the attachment itself, in the file name attachment. But if you have hundreds of bills and it's taking, gobs of time for your people to put all these bills out, then the lack of customization may not be such a hit as compared to the benefit of having this done automatically, all these emails firing automatically and sending them out. So I just want to bring that up, that there's a trade-off there as far as when you use this email function of customization versus speed. And if you do need, for example, your firm does need that level of personalization of your emails, dear such and such, attached is your most recent bill from, Kaufman Law Firm. Please be aware that our amounts are due within 30 days, et cetera, et cetera. Sincerely, Paul Kaufman, blah, blah, blah. That's a level of customization you may have and you may want to retain. So just to keep that in mind. Now, before we move on to the export function, the other piece of this screen that relates to email is those clients that it is pulled in. So all three of these clients have every component in place to be able to do this correctly. But, for example, if I wanted to uncheck one of these, for example, this last pre-bill, I did not want it to send that email out, for example, then you just uncheck it. so you can uncheck it and then it won't go into the run. Now, people have asked me at this point, what about if you have a consolidation? And if you have a consolidation, then where do you, first of all, how do you indicate whether this file or this exported file is a consolidation? If it's a consolidation, guys, you will not see a matter code designation right here. So this iSoft General is not a consolidation, but these two other clients are. And the other component is you do indicate what the file format for those attachments is in the consolidation screen. So if you guys are, anyone is doing consolidations out there, you're probably also wondering, gee, when I go to those matters, they're part of a consolidation. I can't set those formats on that matter screen because they're part of a consolidation. So rest assured, you can still set those formats like PDF or an HTML. You just do it from the consolidation screen because they built the software around the fact that you may want to use this feature for consolidations. So it works the same, and all of this is in the help file, by the way. There's, and I printed out all of the help file information just to make sure it was comprehensive, and it is. There's all the information is there. So at this point, we've actually used this feature to do one of the two things, and that is to email out bills. And if I click this export email right now, it will automatically, and unfortunately in our virtual environment here for training, we're not connected to an Outlook account, it would actually fire up your email and start dropping those emails into your sent folder and dropping them out into the ether and sending them to your clients. But we're only halfway done here, because if you're either using this email function and this export function, or frankly, after I just discussed the alternate reason you may not want to use email, you don't use email, you'll click on the export piece of this. This is where, say for example, you didn't want to send emails, but you sure do like the idea of having Juris creating PDFs of 216 of your client bills in one fell swoop. Now think about that. Some people don't use the email function and they love this export function for that very reason. For example, right now, if in your firm you're creating bills and at the end of the billing cycle someone is having to do a file, create PDF, and then name the PDF, and then saving it, that can take time for each one that has to be created. Either that's one person or assistants to attorneys. Whatever the reason is, it takes time to name PDFs for each file, each bill. Well, this feature alone can save you gobs of time in that when I use it for just this export function, it's going to create every single PDF attachment, every single PDF file for the bills automatically. Think about it this way. If you had 187 different client bills, you do not have to, as you know, whenever you save something to PDF, it wants to know the name of the PDF. Juris will do that automatically. It will name the PDF or whatever the attachment is automatically. Now, it can't do that until you actually press this options button, just like we did for email. Notice we had to build the email attachment name using options. Well, if I don't want to use this email, I just want to use the export function, I still need to do something very similar. So I'm going to click on that. Once I bring that up, it's exactly the same screen in front of you, and the feature of building the format is exactly the same on the bottom. For example, I may have a similar requirement in our firm that all of our attachments have, for example, the bill number, the client's nickname, that's our short name for the client, the matter or case's nickname, maybe even today's date, for example. We like to have the date. That might be another addition that you want. And then the user-defined text. That is exactly like we discussed before. So we may have, for example, the name of the law firm, for example. And again, this is, think of anything that you would like to include in PDFs in the file name. It's not something as basic as what I'm doing here is using a firm's name, because this could be an internal flag. For example, May bills, or the April bill set, or first week in May bill set, whatever you needed to differentiate what grouping you're talking about. And if you don't need it, just take it off. Don't include this user-defined component. So you're still building the name. See, even below, it's telling you what the final, this is the attachment's name right here. And here's the kicker. When you export these attachments, Juris needs to know where to drop these attachments to. And that's why you want to indicate where you're going to drop them in this export file path. So when you click Browse, it's just like any other computer. It's going to ask you where exactly would you like these files to drop. So in our case, I'm going to drop it, say, for example, on the desktop. But what might be more relevant to you guys is something like a shared network drive. And you could even do this in groupings. For example, for each attorney, you could export their bills as PDFs or as RTF files and drop them into their individual share file folders. That way, not only are you saving time creating all these attachments or all these files and their names, but you're even dropping them into the correct folders so that you can tell those assistants or attorneys, hey, get your bills for April, they're in your share drive folder. So that's one of the components that you need to set. You need to tell it where to drop it. Once you've done that and you press OK, you've now told the system what it needs to do on the export file. So now it knows that when I export these files, send them to this specific location. And it could be, in your case, there might be hundreds of clients where the process, like I said, of creating the PDF could be a complete time saving over an existing process, which is very slow. Now, just to be clear here, if at any point you don't want to use either one of these features and want to use the other, then just uncheck the boxes for the ones you don't want to include. Now, if, for example, you never use the email function, for example, like I said earlier, you might not fit your needs, then rather than have run this process and have it pull in names that you then have to uncheck, just don't put a file format into that email drop-down for each one of the clients. So that'll make sure nothing ever shows up when you click this Get Pre-Bills. So I have to say, this screen takes a fair amount of getting used to as far as, when you first start using it. But, and primarily I see more people using the export feature than the email. But once you get used to it and then build it into your process, it could be, like I said, a considerable time saver for you. And the end result of when you want to run this process is to click on this Export Email function button. And then, like I said, at that point, if it's emails, it'll fire up your email system, your email like Outlook, and send them all on their way. If you're just using the export feature, then it's not going to email anything. It's just going to drop all of those files onto your shared drive that you decided to place them in. So that's primarily the process. Now, two things I want to highlight before we kind of wrap up for some questions, and that is, one of them is, why is this process, how can this process help me if I have a specific need? For example, sometimes firms, and one of our consultants told me about this scenario, and it's interesting because some firms may need to tweak client bills further than what the Juris Bill Designer allows. So those of you who have ever gone into the Juris Bill Designer know that it's a fairly, busy-looking screen. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of formatting that has to be done for those different bill designs. Well, if, for example, you need to do more tweaking of the bill design that you just can't seem to make happen in Juris, or you're not familiar with the bill design, some firms will actually export their bills using this export function as, say, an RTF format. And then they open up those bills in a separate program, and then they can tweak the bill to their needs, aligning things better, adding things. For example, one of the things I remember hearing is that some firms will have, say, a holiday note that will go out in December to indicate that, say, a firm is closed for a couple weeks in late December. Well, having to add that field to your bill design, and that's a custom field, there is no such field, having to add that to your bill design could take a fair amount of effort for the assistance of support. Whereas just exporting your bills as RTF files and then going in and dropping in that text, for example, on those bills may be a complete time saver. Now, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and that's primarily the feature in a nutshell. So again, if it fits the need in either the email component or the export or both, then the feature will do what you need. One of the things, though, I do want to kind of highlight is that idea of consolidations. I didn't really get to show you guys where you're setting your file types on consolidations. So let me go ahead and close up that feature just because I don't want to leave that hanging. And if I go under clients, let's look at an example of, say, a consolidation of a firm that's got a consolidation, and I have set one up for one of our firm clients called Avon Technologies. So if you'll notice in the Avon Technologies client screen, I've got my matters, but if, for example, I open up one of these matters and go to the address tab, this is where you would see those selections of what the file format is. They're missing. And to some people it might be, where are they? How do I change those settings if I need to? They are actually under the consolidation folder. So if I close up matters, they're right here under the consolidation folder. And here's where, depending on how many consolidations you may have a long list here, then you're going to have for each one a send copy to line for that individual client and matter. And just like in the individual matters, the same fields are here. What are we sending a copy to? Number of copies, whether it's printable, which is by default set, whether you're sending an AR statement. And here's the kicker, is that you get to set those formats here on the consolidation screen, not on the individual matter screen. Lastly, the actual file types that are available, and this is true of individual matters or consolidations, what are the most relevant to you and which ones offer the most bang for the buck? As I mentioned, PDF is probably the most popular just from having taught this component of my Juris fundamentals class. So like I said, people love to be able to retain a solid design, and PDF gives you that. But RTF allows you to continue the modification process afterward. Excel as well. If, for example, you needed, Excel to be able to do further things, if you're printing out from Excel, that might be a choice. One of the rare ones I found is this idea of HTML. The system will create an HTML file, and I used to be a web designer, so I know that HTML is a powerful format if you want to do layout. But when you're talking about HTML, if you're setting that as a format, then it needs to sit somewhere on a web server. And if I was to select HTML for my, well, it wouldn't really make much sense for the email, because if you think about it, when you click on the attachment, then it's going to want to run an HTML file. So more relevant, that would be an exported document. So if I set it as an HTML here, this needs to be placed onto a web server. So if you don't have if for example your firm has an intranet and you're reviewing bills via the intranet, so that people can say log into the intranet from disparate locations and see the bills before they're printed, then you may use this, but probably one of the more rare choices. I would say that PDF is your most relevant or most common, but like I said, if you need that level of customization, RTF will give that to you. Okay, so we're actually a little bit early, but that's because I kind of breezed through this process fairly quickly. Let me go ahead and open it up for any questions, or even if anyone has any examples of using this feature in their existing firms, feel free to share that with the group.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for your very informative session. This does conclude the presentation portion of our session today. As a reminder, if you do have any questions for Paul, please feel free to ask them via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. We do have some questions that have come in, so let me get started on those. Okay. The first one's an easy one. What version of Juris were you working with?
Actually, this version of Juris is 2.7, so yeah, but it's still, the entire feature is available in 2.6 if someone's running 2.6, for example.
Okay. Does the sent email bills show up in our Outlook sent emails?
Yes, it does. It's essentially connecting to your email program, and you will see them as sent emails. So that is correct. Now, if anyone has ever used the report distribution function, for example, in Juris Suite, then they'll know that it's a different process, that the log of those distributions being sent out is actually in Juris. But in this case, it's connecting to your email. So at that point, it's handing it off to your email program, and then you will see those emails in your sent folder, because it's whoever clicks this button, it's the person who's doing that whose email will see those sent files.
Okay. How does the export portion differ from Juris BX?
Good point. So Juris BX, great question. The Juris BX file will allow you to create what's called a leads file, which is used for e-billing. A lot of firms require e-billing files if they're going to pay invoices, for example. What the export function allows you to do, it does have the leads file as a choice, but its primary difference is that it does a lot more than just the leads file. Now, I, for one, if I'm teaching e-billing, then if I'm creating leads files, then I do all of those building of leads file in Juris BX. I don't do them using this email export function, because the Juris BX feature, which is actually right here on the side of the screen, that's a dedicated tool for that function. What this gives you is just more flexibility. It gives you the ability to create those exported files in a variety of formats like we talked about at length. But Juris BX only creates a leads file, which is a leads compliant e-commerce or e-billing file format. So this gives you more, but if you're, just to be sure, just to be clear here, if you're doing e-billing, then I would not recommend using this feature as your primary leads creation tool. I would continue to use Juris BX. Good question.
Okay. Is there a way to email the statement of accounts, either with the current invoice or separately?
No. No. It just well, if you need to email anything else out of Juris that you generate, then you can of course generate it, PDF it, and then attach it. But this process only sends the bill, or only exports the bill, because as we saw earlier, the only chance that you can create or customize the file name is the bill itself, is the bill attachment. So it only creates a single file. But again, if you need to create other components, like, say for example, you're using AR statements as a early collections process, or a little nudge to your clients that they've got aging balances, then you can still print those out, save them as PDF, and then attach them to emails, for example. But this only allows you to generate the single file, which is the bill.
Okay. Can this be done remotely? I found I cannot, but maybe it's my version.
Now I'm guessing when they say remotely that they're logging in. Yeah, anytime if you're having any difficulties with running this process, and I don't have details of what error that person is seeing, but yeah, the system should work as long as you can get to your Juris, whether through VPN or other ways. As long as you can get this process and run it, then it should work. Now, you bring up a good point that if, for example, you're doing this remotely and for some reason the system cannot locate what your email system is, for example, say you're dialed in remotely through VPN, and at that point, you're on a different laptop, for example, and now the system that the email that it's trying to connect to is not your Outlook, but another email system that's connected to your laptop, for example, then there is potential that it might not work. And so in that regard, I don't have the knowledge of how to debug that on the call right now, but that would be a good thing to just call support and say, why can't I run this remotely? And they'll be able to help you with that.
Okay. Can you add multiple people to the email?
Can you add multiple people to the email? Um, no, you can't. In other words, what they're referring to, I believe, is that if, for example, that's a good question. I've never tried that, but and let me bring up the screen. I believe that the person is referring to. If, for example, that I have a client and their billing address is their email address, for example, is in this email address field, could I, for example, add a semicolon and add another email to it? And let's see. I've never tried this, but let's see if it lets me. It does let me add another email address to the email itself. Now, whether, I just don't know for certain whether that works. In other words, you could potentially send it to multiple people just by adding additional people in this email address field. A good way to test that is just to do, for example, one of your bills and then create a dummy client in Matter, and then have it sent to 2 different emails in this field and see if both get it. The fact that it's not prompting me or saying, you can't have a separate, or you can't have that data in that field, tells me there is a potential, but I just have not heard of that before, and that's a great question because I need to get that answer and research that. But good way to test it, just drop another email into a test account and run it. If 2 people get it, then you could have a client where if multiple people needed to get it, say the CIO and maybe, or not CIO, but CFO, and then maybe an accountant or CPA, then you can put both of your email addresses in there. Great question.
Okay, what about, let's see, what will the actual email look like? Does it look like the other bills we mail out?
Right. So this is where, that's one of the questions I get a lot in my classes is, what does that email look like? And it is extremely sparse in that there is no real text in the body. It's just the subject line is the attachment name, which, like I said, has all the detail that you can customize and put in it, because that's your one chance to kind of put all your data in there. But the emails will not look like your other emails. So if you're sending bills out now and they have a really nice layout and nice verbiage, then going with this automated function, you will lose that customization, that ability to say it the way you want. And for that reason, I think it's a feature that only fits certain instances where you really have a lot of time being eaten up sending out bills, and you really don't mind the fact that the emails are fairly bland, if you will.
Okay, next question. What about cover letters? Can you export cover letters for customization?
Cover letters, so if you're not through this process, no, you can't export cover letters. It's only going to, like I said, it's only going to export or email the bill itself. But again, I know that there's other features that allow you to print cover letters. And if, for example, and I just clicked on it, it's the print cover letters feature in billing. So you can, for example, use this feature to export your cover letters based on clients. But again, this is just going to print out either directly to your printer if you're sending them to, for example, in envelopes. But rest assured, you could, even if you wanted to, use the print cover letters feature as printing to a PDF. But as you guys are probably already thinking, you can't do that for a large swath of clients like the export email bills function does. This would be a one-by-one feature and thereby take up potentially a fair amount of time. But if the other component of their question was, can I print cover letters using this export email bills function, then the short answer is no. It just does the bill.
Okay, is it possible, this question I think might be related to one we asked earlier. Is it possible to have a bill emailed to someone with a carbon copy to a different email address?
Right, that is related to what we were saying earlier as to the only component where you can tell Juris Well, there's two ways you can do that, actually, now that I think about it. And again, some of you probably have come across this before. Under client records, if, for example, and I'll go back to JonesNet, I needed to send additional copies of client and matters to different people, then it's possible that I could create a different addresses, and then within those addresses, actually, no, it's still, we're still back to, because it's only going to grab one address, your primary address. What I was hoping for, guys, is that you could, in some way, create an additional billing address and then put that second, like you said, the CC name into that additional address and then have it work. But the truth is, the system is looking for the primary address. In this case, it's my main office here, but it's looking for the primary address. So, John, you're right. This goes back to that idea of can you add additional emails in this field? And frankly, if it does work, then I'm almost 99%, 100% sure that it would not know to put the second email in this email address field into the CC field of your email. So again, we're starting to bump into some of the limitations of the email side, but again, it may be a time saver in certain circumstances.
Okay, when emailing bills, will it show all of the descriptions of time entries, dates, and times?
Yes. In fact, at the point, essentially think about it this way, guys, is what you're doing is, let me go back into the billing feature, is that whatever the bills look like that you have, for example, let me bring up the 4 I had, whatever these bills look like that you've been creating and editing and modifying, like you said, descriptions and maybe doing markdowns, deletions, things like that, maybe whip transfers, any of those things that are in that bill design are being created as bills and then being sent out. So this system doesn't do anything related to changing the format of your bills. It just gives you two key features, and that is, I want to send a lot of them, or gee, it sure would be nice if I had some feature that would drop those 300 PDFs somewhere so that, you know, Bill in the office down the hall didn't have to do them manually. That's all it does. It does not, it will retain the bill format that you have. Now, granted, if you're changing the bill format to, say, HTML or RTF or something like that, then I think it's prudent to take a look at the exported file first before you were to, say, send them to clients. But that's just good processing. That's just best practices.
Okay. Can receipts be attached to invoices?
Can receipts be attached to invoices? Okay, so now we're getting outside of this feature. I know that in version 2.7 you can attach receipts, and you can attach like expense attachments, invoices, receipts, things like that to the records. But as far as this feature is concerned, this has nothing to do with, sending out any receipts. If you have any process where you send, for example, clients copies of receipts that your attorneys incur for travel or whatever, then that process cannot be enhanced or made quicker by this process. You would still need to do that in the way that you're currently doing. That is either scanning them or basically printing them out of Juris and then attaching them as, say, our old favorite, a PDF.
Okay, I think you mentioned this earlier. Will this work on version 2.5 and 2.6.1?
From what I understand, 2.6.1 it will work. I don't have enough knowledge of 2.5 to know if it'll work, but if you're running 2.5 and you are able to get to this screen and it looks similar to what this Feature Friday looks like, then again, you should be able to run it. If it's there in your feature set under billing right here, then you should be able to run it. And again, if you're concerned about what it creates, then I would just do a test entry and make sure that it works to your satisfaction. I don't know too much about that version 2.5 to say for sure, but if you have any concerns about whether it's not working correctly or you would like this feature, then consider possibly upgrading to 2.6 or 2.7.
Okay. I do use this, but it does not automatically send unless Outlook is not open. Is there any way to get around this?
No, I've heard that before as well. So again, some of the little the idiosyncrasies of Juris. I think if everyone on the call has used Juris for a while, we know that it's software that's been around for over 20 years. It has its little things that you learn that one may refer to as idiosyncrasies. That's one of them that I have heard, and since I can't test it right here due to my virtual machine, I can't say for sure. But I have not. Well, we have version 2.72 out now. So, if, for example, the person asking that question is using 2.7.1 or 2.6, it's possible that you could upgrade to 2.7.2, run it, and see if it at least will run it while Outlook is open. But I haven't heard of that explicitly being fixed.
Okay. So all of this needs to be done prior to posting any bills, correct?
Right, exactly. A great point. That's a great point. The billing process itself in Juris ends when you post bills. So yes, you have to, if you were to, for example, post your bills and then realize that you wanted to use this feature, but you or someone else posted the bills, then you can use the unpost bills to unpost them. But the questionnaire was actually correct, that you do this process before you post your bills. That's a great point, because as you can see, we talked about this a little earlier in the session. This select feature on the screen is keying off two main flags. One is that your pre-bills are marked ready to print, which is prior to posting, and all pre-bills marked ready to post, which, as you can imagine, is prior to posting.
Okay. I export most of my pre-bills, except electronic, to an email folder so they can easily be emailed. Is there any way to enter the claim number so that I could just use the email feature?
Can you read that again, John? What was the second half of that?
I export most of my pre-bills, except electronic, to an email folder so they can easily be emailed. Is there any way to enter the claim number so that I could just use the email feature?
Well, if you ever want to just use the email feature, then you simply just either uncheck any files that come into your export screen and then use the email feature that we talked about earlier. Now, the claim number, I'm not really sure what he's referring to, but you can at any point add a custom level to either the email attachment or to the export attachment using the user-defined text that we talked about earlier. So if, for example, something like a claim number, I'm not familiar with what that might be referring to, if you needed to, for example, include a claim number, then you could potentially put it in this user-defined field, but then at that point, remember, the user-defined field is straight text. It's not corresponding or getting information from each client and matter, so it's static. So I'm not sure if that would necessarily solve his problem. Again, any questions that that I'm not able to answer, trust me, the support group has had many people, because of the potential time savings of this feature, have had a lot of calls about how to configure it correctly. So if I didn't help with that question, feel free to give support a call, and maybe they can assist you further.
Okay, I use an email-based fax service. Will the email feature accept a fax number email address? For example, 555-1212 @fax.com.
Yeah. Oh, great question. I do not. I have never tried that or heard of someone trying it, but it is, again, one of those situations where if you were to enter that fax email address, as he's referring to, he or she's referring to, then again, the best way to approach that is to do a test case where you create a dummy account, put that fax email address in there, and then have it send. Now, I would, my gut's telling me, and again, I have not walked through this, if that fax email service you're referring to prints out attachments to emails that are sent to that email fax address, then the answer is yes, it should print out the attachment of the bill. But since you are sending something to essentially to a fax using, an email address as a conduit, then I would highly recommend doing a test case scenario to see if it works properly. But that's an interesting scenario.
Okay. If we wanted to add a line to either the email or the exported bill asking the client to replenish their trust account, how would you recommend doing so?
Yeah, so if you were to, gotcha. If you have a case with a client that has a trust account that needs to be replenished, at any point, there's scenarios like that where you've got to say something to specific clients. Then, of course, don't think of this feature as a resource. It will not help you in that regard because, like I said, it's automatically doing things over lots of files, so it wouldn't handle your scenario. But in scenarios where, like you indicated, there's a trust account that needs to be refilled or replenished, then you still have to rely on, for example, adding a field to a bill design, for example, and then for specific clients that have trust accounts that are being depleted, then just by putting data into that custom field, for example, and those of you who use defined fields in Juris are probably familiar with that, but the long and short of it is you can create a custom field in Juris that allows you to drop that corresponding field onto a bill, and then for those accounts that require a replenishment of trust account, then you can just drop the text into that custom field for the matter or the case, and then it will show up on the bill. For example, if a client was low on their trust account, then I would go into their matter and then go to that custom field, drop in that text that says, please replenish your trust account, blah, 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 and then make sure that I'm using the bill design that shows that custom field. That would solve your problem.
Okay. Let's see. What if a client did not get the email? Can we reprint the statement to mail out?
Oh, sure. Yes, yes. If for any reason that the bill or the email does not arrive, then you still have all of your capabilities within your billing to be able to print or export the PDF manually, and then attach them to a separate email and resend them, or simply print them out and drop them in an envelope and let the U.S. mail make sure that it arrives at the customer's site. But yes, you still have all of those other features available should that occur. Now, if it ever occurs and you're during the early process of instigating this email program, then I highly recommend a test case with a dummy account to make sure that the emails, that they're acceptable to you and that they are delivered appropriate, because as we saw with the earlier question, it's possible that it's not connecting to your email program correctly. So yeah, good question.
Okay, can we export pre-bills to attorneys for their review/edit, or can it only be done once for the final?
Well, no. Actually, at this point, again, you're still working with pre-bills, so it's not like that you could use this feature even during an earlier phase of your pre-bill editing. So yeah, you could use this feature, great question, in multiple components, or especially with the export feature that I think they're referring to, you could do this. You could export pre-bills in early phases of pre-bill editing or prior to initial pre-bill editing. Use this to drop, dozens or hundreds of files out there for attorneys to review, and then use it again when later on you've actually editing pre-bill has been completed, and you again want the attorneys to do a sign-off of the final pre-bill. So yes, at any point you can leverage this prior to posting, as we saw in that earlier question. This all happens prior to posting, because once you say post on those pre-bills, then when you run this, they'll say, I can't find any bills.
Okay. With the email feature, will bills from the same client be sent as a single email with multiple attachments, or individual emails per invoice?
It sends one email per bill. So it'll send, right, it attaches each bill to a single email. So that's why if you're using consolidations, if you want to consolidate multiple bills onto one email, or into one bill and then send that as an email, then as we saw when we ran the feature, a couple of my entries were consolidations. But it's going to send an email with each matters bill. So it's not going to put like 4 different email attachments into one email and send it. It's going to send an email for each matters bill. So if that's unacceptable, or you'd rather consider having multiple attachments to one email, then maybe the automated email function is not the right solution in your case.
Okay. We have time for one more question here. I often need to email an invoice to an attorney for them to forward on to the client. Would it be appropriate at the time a matter is opened in Juris to always fill in the export field on the address tab? I would be selecting PDF format.
Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, as long as your process is going to involve exporting or emailing later downstream, if you will, then yes, that's a great point of when you're creating new clients. For example, if I created a new client and I have a new matter, then I'm going to make sure that as I'm creating those new matters, that and I'm going to go right to the screen that was indicated, I'm going to go right to that address as I'm filling out the matter and make sure that I drop in the correct export or emailed attachment file type. So yes, that's a great practice, and will save you from having to come back later when things aren't going well and saying, oh, we forgot to put that in there. Great question.
Okay, Paul, I do have a question for you. We have, I don't know, about a half a dozen questions or so that we're actually out of time that I have not gotten to. Mm-hmm. Do you recommend, do you want me to send the questions to you? Do you recommend that people just reach out to support to try to get answers first?
No, feel free to have those sent to me, John, and I will gladly respond to those people and answer their questions.
Okay, great. I will send those over to you probably later this afternoon then.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, that does conclude today's webinar, and I would like to thank Paul once again for his expert advice on today's topic, and to all of our attendees for taking time out of their busy day to join us.